The blade moved into my thumb far more easily than it should have. That should have hurt. It didn't, and that was what terrified me. I had been standing in the same place for 5 days. My right hand was trapped between an 800-pound boulder and a canyon wall in the middle of the Utah desert. The reason I couldn't feel the knife pressing into my own skin was because the tissue in my hand was slowly dying while still attached to my body. When I heard a faint release of trapped air from inside the wound, I knew time was running out. But let's go back to where it all began. How I got here. April 26, 2003. I was 27 years old, an engineer turned outdoorsman who'd already climbed all 59 of Colorado's highest peaks solo in winter. I was in good shape. I knew what I was doing, I thought. I drove out to Canyonlands National Park in Utah the night before, slept in my truck, and set off the next morning around 9:15. The plan was simple. Bike out to Blue John Canyon, one of these incredible slot canyons carved into the red rock desert of southern Utah, explore for a few hours, and be back at my truck by nightfall. I packed 2 burritos, a small amount of candy, and 1 bottle of water. Just enough for a day trip. Here's the thing I didn't do that I should have done. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Not my roommates, not my family, nobody. I'd done it 100 times before and nothing had ever gone wrong, so why bother? That decision very nearly killed me. I biked to the canyon entrance, locked up my bike, and started hiking on foot. These canyons are wild, sometimes 30 meters deep and barely a meter wide, like walking through a crack in the earth. I'd done this kind of thing so many times it felt routine. At around 2:45 in the afternoon, I reached a drop-off in the canyon, a spot where the floor fell away and I had to lower myself down. There was a boulder wedged between the walls, about the size of a bus tire. I stood on it to work my way down to the lower canyon floor. When my weight shifted, the boulder moved. My instinct was to drop off and away from it. I got down to the canyon floor and looked up, and it was falling right at me. I threw my hands up in front of my face. The boulder hit my left hand first, ricocheted off the wall, then slammed into my right hand and wedged itself into a new position between the 2 canyon walls. It was sitting about 3 feet off the ground, held in place by both walls and my right hand. I was pinned. Completely, totally, unmovably pinned. I yanked. I pulled. Nothing. That rock wasn't moving. The nearest paved road was 20 miles away. I was 30 meters below the canyon surface. I had no way to signal for help, and nobody on earth knew where I was. Day 1. The first few hours I was actually pretty calm, or at least I told myself to be calm. I'm an engineer. I started problem solving. Option 1. Chip away at the boulder with the pocket knife I had on me. I spent the entire first night doing this, scraping and stabbing at the rock, trying to carve enough away to free my hand. After about 15 hours of work, I'd produced a small pile of dust. I wasn't even close. Option 2, move the boulder. I had climbing rope with me, so I rigged up a makeshift pulley system. With one free arm against 800 pounds of sandstone, I got absolutely nowhere. That left option 3. I'd thought about it almost immediately after getting trapped, but it seemed so extreme, so unthinkable, that I kept pushing it to the back of my mind. But it was always there. Cut my arm off. I had a cheap multi-tool pocket knife. I took out one of the blades and pressed it against my arm. I couldn't even break the skin properly. The knife was a dollar store piece of junk, barely sharp enough to cut rope. There was no way I was cutting through bone with that thing. So I set it aside. I wasn't giving up. I just needed to think. Days 2 through 3. I rationed everything. 2 burritos stretched as far as they could go. I ate tiny amounts at a time, knowing I had no idea how long I'd be here. The single bottle of water went fast because I was already dehydrated from hiking, and the desert heat during the day was brutal. I used my rope to rig up a kind of seat so I could take weight off my legs during the day, lifting myself up just enough to rest. But sleeping was almost impossible. It was too cold, too painful, and every time I started to drift off, the reality of my situation would jolt me awake. By day 3, I started filming myself on the small camcorder I'd brought. I talked to the camera partly to stay sane, and partly because I was starting to think this might be the only record of what happened to me. I made another attempt at the amputation on day 3, this time trying to stab the knife into my arm to start cutting. I couldn't get it deep enough, and even if I could get through the skin and muscle, there was still the bone. 2 bones, actually, the radius and ulna. That knife was never going to cut through them. I knew it. I stopped. Days 4 through 5. Saying goodbye. By Wednesday, the 4th day, I had accepted that I was probably going to die in this canyon. I'm not saying that dramatically. It was just a rational conclusion. My food was gone, my water was gone, I'd run out of drinkable water and had started collecting my own urine in my water bottle and drinking it to stay hydrated. It tasted exactly as bad as you'd imagine, but the alternative was worse. I carved my name into the canyon wall. I put my birth date and what I thought would be my death date right there in the sandstone. Then I set up the camcorder and recorded my will. I said goodbye to my mom, my dad, my sister. I told them I loved them. I said the things you say when you think you're never going to see someone again. Then I sat there in the silence of the canyon and waited. The strange thing is that once I accepted it, I got very quiet inside. I started thinking about my life, what mattered, what didn't, all the career stuff, the money stuff. None of it meant anything down there. What I kept coming back to was people. My family, my friends, the experiences I'd had and the ones I'd never get to have. During that 5th night, I had a vision. I don't know how else to describe it. I saw myself in the future, with a 1-year-old blonde boy on my hip, lifting him up. I could see his face, and I thought, if that's my future son, then I have a future. I'm going to get out of here. It sounds strange, but it kept me going through that night. Day 6. The Epiphany. By the 6th morning, something had shifted in me. I wasn't calm anymore. I was angry. I started yanking at my arm again, really going at it, twisting and pulling with everything I had left. And in that rage, I felt something I hadn't felt before, my bones bending. My arm was wedged so tightly in that specific position that when I threw my body weight against it in a certain direction, the leverage concentrated right at my wrist. The bones were actually flexing. And then it hit me like a lightning bolt. I didn't have to cut through the bones. I could break them. If I could break both the radius and the ulna, snap them clean, then I could use the knife on everything else. Skin, muscle, arteries, tendons. The knife couldn't cut bone, but it could handle soft tissue. This was actually doable. I grabbed the backside of the boulder, got my feet up on the canyon wall, and used my entire body as a lever, humping my body weight over the rock until I heard it. Pow! The first bone snapped. The sound echoed off the canyon walls. I felt this enormous wave of excitement, not pain, not yet, just pure adrenaline. I repositioned, grabbed the underside of the boulder, and pushed and sank my body downward to get leverage going the opposite direction on the second bone. Pow! Both bones, broken right at the wrist. I looked at my arm and muttered to myself that there was no turning back now. The amputation. I pulled out the smaller blade on the multi-tool. It was about 2 inches long and slightly sharper than the larger one. I pressed it against my skin and pushed. It went in. I worked methodically, like I was performing surgery on someone else. I cut through the top layer of skin and muscle and hit an artery.
and realized I'd forgotten to put the tourniquet on. I'd made a tourniquet days earlier from the insulated lining of my water bottle, and in the intensity of the moment I'd completely forgotten about it. I tied it off, watched the bleeding slow, and kept cutting. First artery, second artery, a third, then muscle. The knife was dull enough that it was more like sawing and tearing than cutting, but I kept going. I was completely focused, not thinking about anything except the next layer. Then I hit the tendon. The knife couldn't cut it. I ended up grabbing it with the plier attachment on the multi-tool and twisting, ripping through it until it finally gave way. That part was slow and excruciating. Then I could see the nerve, just a thin, pale cord running through my arm. I knew what was coming. I took the knife, slipped it under the nerve, and plucked it. It felt like I'd plunged my arm into a vat of molten metal. The burning shot all the way up to my shoulder. I did it a second time, and the pain doubled. But I also knew that was the last hard part. A few more moments of cutting. And then I fell backward. I wasn't attached anymore. I had been standing in the same spot for 6 days, and now I was free. The feeling that came over me in that moment, I've never experienced anything like it before or since. Pure euphoria. It was the happiest moment of my life, standing in a canyon, covered in my own blood, holding the stump of my right arm. I was crying and laughing at the same time. I had never felt anything like that moment. The overwhelming realization that I was still alive.
Getting out. I didn't have long to celebrate. The adrenaline was keeping me upright, but I was losing blood. I hadn't slept in days, and I still had miles of desert between me and help. I gathered my gear, rope, climbing equipment, the water bottle full of urine, still the only liquid I had. I took one last photo of the boulder. Good riddance. I hiked down through the canyon until I hit a 65-foot cliff drop. I rigged up my rope and rappelled down it one-handed, terrified the whole way that I'd pass out and fall. I made it to the bottom and found a pool of water, stagnant, murky, honestly disgusting. It was the best thing I've ever tasted in my life. Then I started walking. 7 miles through the desert, one hand gone, tourniquet on, blood-soaked, and running on empty. I climbed 800 vertical feet up out of the canyon basin, which nearly finished me off. My energy was gone. The adrenaline had faded. That's when I heard the helicopter. A family hiking in the area had spotted me and called for help. Rescuers had actually found my truck 8 miles away and had been searching the area. The helicopter had been out looking for me and was literally about to turn back to refuel when they spotted me coming out of the canyon. The timing was razor thin. The medic said that if I'd been found even an hour later, I would have bled out. They airlifted me to a hospital. I'd lost 40+ pounds over those 6 days. I was severely dehydrated. My hand was amputated at the site. The boulder was later moved by a team using special equipment to recover what remained.